Hello, and welcome to LeaderFolk, an inclusive look inside the Jewish community. I'm your host, Sarah Bogomolny, and today I'm so pleased to welcome Carrie Bornstein, the Executive Director of Mayyim Hayyim Living Waters Community Mikveh in Massachusetts. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks so much for coming to chat with us. So to start off with, I would love to just hear a little bit about you. Where do you come from? What is your Jewish journey? And how did you end up where you are today?
I grew up in New York, in Long Island, and I have been living in the Boston area for about the last 20 years now. I grew up as sort of the poster child for the reform movement in many ways. I went to preschool in our synagogue and continued on through Hebrew school and youth group. I started going to the URJ Eisner camp in 1986 when I was 8 years old. And that had a tremendous impact on my life. And camp was the place where I really grew into loving being Jewish and discovering people who were excited about that, and where being yourself was cool and getting involved in things was great. And I found myself gravitating towards people that I felt like I would never otherwise get to know and be friends with. And certainly it's thinking about the recent announcements of camps in the summer and not being a possibility, certainly Eisner and other URJ camps and other camps all over. It's I just was thinking about all of the kids just sobbing that night when the announcement was made, knowing that would have been me if I was a kid right now. So camp had a very big impact on my life, and I stayed involved in the Jewish community in my synagogue and youth group throughout high school. I actually grew up in the part of Long Island where there were not many Jews, in Oyster Bay, where actually I was one of maybe 10 Jewish kids in my grade. So my experience was really gravitating towards the Jewish community that I had in my synagogue. And then ended up, when I was in college, I spent a semester at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And that was the first time when I really was exposed to anyone Jewishly who did anything different from me. And it was a very eye-opening experience, is probably the positive way of putting it. It was also just very challenging and frustrating to me because I I a whole part of the Jewish world that I didn't know anything about, and couldn't figure out why I thought I had been the poster child, and I was involved in everything. I was like the super Jew of everything, and I was kind of shocked to find out that I went into Friday night services in Jerusalem and had no idea what was going on. And that made me really angry because I felt like I'm a Jew. I should be able to walk into any synagogue in the world and know what's going on and feel like I'm with my people. And so there was, like one of those, when someone has an impact on your life and you have no idea who they are. There was someone there that night in Friday night in Shul who took me in and took me under her wing and, could tell that I was lost and didn't know what was happening, and showed me the pages. And, I don't think she spoke any English. I certainly didn't speak any Hebrew, to speak of. But she kind of took me along, and I discovered that there was this whole world out there that I wanted to understand. It wasn't so much important to me that I necessarily wanted it for myself necessarily at that stage, but I wanted to understand it. And I think it was actually because of my strong identity growing up that I wanted to dive deeper into it, as opposed to just getting angry and walking away. So I sort of from there just went on this path to learn as much as I could, and really feel like I was building my my Jewish knowledge of our tradition and where it comes from and what it means. And that, that had a huge impact on my life. I ended up spending a year at Pardes in Jerusalem, again, after I was married, but before we had kids, which is a beautiful time to be away like that. And that was where I really felt like I was discovering Jewish texts for myself, and felt like I could be a player in Jewish leadership and the Jewish tradition, not just watching it from the sidelines, but that I could really own it just as much as anybody else could.
When you went to Israel the first time and spent that time studying abroad, was it a thought in your head that you wanted to work in the Jewish world, or were you still exploring?
I don't think I ever explored any like remote possibility outside of working in the Jewish community. It's funny. In my senior year of college, Rabbi Jonah Pesner, who I knew from summer camp, from when I was 8 years old, he called me up my senior year of college and said, this is when he was the rabbi at Temple Israel in Boston. And he said, "We're hiring for a youth director. Do you want to apply?" And I said, "Sure. Why not?" But I had been applying to other jobs at that point. I studied social work in college, but it was always very clear to me that I wanted to do something within the Jewish community. I think it never occurred to me to do anything else. It was just, people would talk about, I ended up working at camp and being a counselor. I went to Eisner all the way through until 1999 when I was, junior in college. And everybody talked about like going off and getting real jobs when they would transition away from camp. And I just always felt like working at camp was the most real thing there possibly could be. So it just made sense. It was like a one thing led to another, that I would continue on to work in the Jewish community.
Mm. And how have you arrived at the place where you are now as the executive director of Mayyim Hayyim in Massachusetts? What was that process like?
So I actually started out as a volunteer mikveh guide when I was working elsewhere in the Jewish community in Boston, and I went through the volunteer mikveh guide training that we actually now are just transitioning to be an online training. Before any of the COVID stuff went down, we were transitioning our really extraordinary in-person training that we lead at Mayyim Hayyim to be able to be accessible by people all over the world. So that's now an online course, which is just tremendously makes me very proud to see that getting out there. So that was my entry into Mayyim Hayyim, and I was a volunteer mikveh guide for a little over a year before there was a position that was opening up. And I actually, the first time I applied to work at Mayyim Hayyim, I did not get the job. So that's like my favorite, one of my favorite stories, that I wasn't hired. And Aliza Kline, who I think you interviewed.
Yeah, she was our first guest a few weeks ago.
So when Aliza called me up to reject me from the position, she just like, she made me feel so good about myself. She was just saying all these wonderful things about how great I was and my leadership in the Jewish community in the future, and how like this wasn't the right fit at the right time, but this wasn't going to work out, but like just all of these wonderful things about me. And I got off the phone thinking, if I can ever work for that person ever, I need to make this happen. And so that was just a lesson for me in rejection. I mean, if I could get rejected from something I really wanted and just feel so much closer to it and more inspired by it, like she did something right there. And so I've carried that lesson through about graceful ways to offer rejections. So then the hire that she had made didn't work out. She came back to me. I said, of course I will go through the process again. And I got the job. So I started off as the mikveh center director, with oversight for the mikveh itself and as a liaison to the clergy in the community and training and supporting our volunteer mikveh guides and coordinating immersions. And it was just, I fell so much deeper in love with the place. And Aliza became an extraordinary mentor for me over the years. And I think she probably knew that I was going to be the executive director a long time before I knew it. And so I became the assistant director. And then when she went on sabbatical for a year in Israel, I was the acting director, and she gave notice about halfway through the year. And the board sort of turned to me. I remember I went out for lunch with Anita Diamond after Aliza told us that she would be leaving. And we just sort of sat there and stared at each other, like, both just distraught that this was happening. And she looked at me and she said, well, you're the acting director. She's gone. You're here. So I guess you're the director. And I was like, whoa, hold on. And I really pushed back, because I said, I don't know if that's what I want. I don't know if that's what you want. And I wanted to really feel like I was being chosen for the position, and not just because I happened to be in the right place in the right time. So the board put a transition team in place, and we went through that whole process. They offered me the job. I accepted the job. And that's the nutshell of where I am now. That was back in 2012 at this point.
I think you're positioned in such an interesting place where your role within one organization has encompassed sort of a spiritual ritual aspect, as well as the more hard business administrative aspects of running the organization. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how you straddle that, or how you manage that evolution.
Yeah, sure. I think it is a wonderful blessing, and it's also a challenge to have the perspective that I have. The fact that I have seen so many different aspects of the organization in depth. I mean, it made my transition into the role so much more smooth, especially to take over after the founding director. That's like, there are a lot of scary statistics out there about likelihood of success and how many people fail within, 18 months or within 3 years. And I remember getting to each of those milestones and be like, okay, I'm still here. I did it. But it meant that I knew the board already. I knew the players, I knew the leadership and the volunteers and how things worked and the history. So that was all a tremendous blessing, and continues to be, that I just really feel each part of the organization very deeply. And ultimately, I prefer to have it that way. I'm happy that it's that way. And it also means that it can be a challenge sometimes, I think, to sort of figure out where to best place my time in some ways, because I want to be involved in all kinds of things. Not because I feel like I need to be, but because I want to be. And there are so many areas where I feel like I can make a contribution that I think having that background and that experience can also be challenging.
I'm curious about how gender plays into your work, both in terms of the actual services that you provide and providing a safe space, and then also in terms of running a staff that, from what I glean from the website, is either all women or femme-presenting individuals.
Yes. So, this is an organization that was founded by women and is led by women. Certainly our staff and a large percentage of our board. We actually have to, we try to bring more men in. It's one of the challenges, how can we get men involved? Because men use the mikveh as well, for all kinds of reasons, just like women. And, gender is, the mikveh is a place for men. Absolutely. And so that's sometimes a challenge to figure out how to broaden in that way. But there's something I think just very powerful about seeing what can happen as the product of women's leadership. This is an organization that has a very strong culture of care and compassion, and from the early days, and I've really worked to try to maintain this. It is very much a 9-to-5 culture in terms of our meetings and our expectations of our staff. Certainly, we have staff who need to be working in the evenings because they're teaching programs at night or doing something involved in with immersions, but our board meetings, our committee meetings, the expectations is that, there's the work day, and then that, people should go home in the evening and have time to themselves with families, have a world outside of that. And that's something that is, I think Aliza and Anita intentionally set it up that way, and wanting to create a space where people could be meaningful leaders in their families and in their personal lives, in addition to at work. And so that's something that stands out that I think is very important. And it's inspiring to see, to have our main donor base, by and large, not 100% of the time, but many of our main contacts for our philanthropy are women. It just, I sometimes am challenged because I don't want to make assumptions about gender and, women are like this. And so therefore that's what we're like. But I do think that there's a lot that's probably not accidental about the culture of the organization and the way that we operate, and the fact that that our gender dynamics are like not the norm in the Jewish community in terms of who the senior leadership are.
So it sounds like Aliza really led by example. I love that story that you have about the rejection from the first position. I think it is really telling of what kind of a leader she was. And then I also think that you have stepped into the role and have done similar things. And I'm wondering if you'd like to share about your experience as a surrogate, as an executive director.
Happy to. Yeah. So in 2017, I carried a baby for a Jewish couple that lived abroad, and didn't know them before. They were strangers. We were matched through an agency. We had to both opt in. It's not like it was just, assigned, but this was something that was very much inspired by Mayyim Hayyim. And especially because of my days, being very involved in the immersion end of things, I saw, just a lot of heartbreak with people struggling to have children, whether miscarriage or coming in after a stillbirth, trying to conceive and just not becoming pregnant month after month after month. And I think, this was like almost before the internet existed, not really, but my mikvah guiding work was like 2005, 2006, 2007, 8, started after that, 2006 and beyond. But this was, before blogs, before people were talking about their stories, certainly before Facebook. And so, as much as we don't talk about fertility challenges now, I think it's in many ways we're just so much farther along than we were at that point. So I felt like I had this window into people's real experiences that I didn't know anything about. And I was incredibly blessed to have a very easy time getting pregnant and staying pregnant and giving birth. I actually really liked being pregnant. I had 3 kids, and felt like I wasn't ready to be done being pregnant, but I was certainly done bringing children into my house, and was like set with that part. And then I would see all these people coming in for immersions who had who either got pregnant or adopted a baby or had a baby by surrogacy, and they might bring their baby in to convert, and just like all of this joy and seeing even without knowing, like watching a gay couple come in to convert their baby, and like you don't have to know anything to know, except like to really be aware that they've been on some tremendous journey. It is, and I just felt like I was a missing link to make that happen. I felt a tremendous amount of privilege, not only because of my ease in getting pregnant, but also like actually because I was the executive director, I felt like I would need to make sure that my board was on board, that I wasn't going to do it if I felt like I was going to get a lot of pushback from them. But I also knew the relationship that I had with them, like I could make this work. And, certainly our, the board chair at the time had dealt with her own fertility struggles and adopted children herself. So I knew that she would get it. The incoming board chair is a owner of a baby and kids toy store, Magic Beans. And so I felt like I was, I could set this up well, and that there would be support for it. And I felt like I because I was in that position, I could do it. And it wasn't going to be a big hurdle to like wonder how people were going to react. Like they would react how they would react, but I could, more inform rather than like ask the community what they thought about this and feel like I needed permission. And the fact that I very much wanted to do this for a Jewish couple or individual, and I could prove my Jewish lineage, like all of those things, I felt like I was having trouble coming up with a reason not to do it. And it was, among the most extraordinary things I've ever done. It was a wonderful experience. I blogged about it the whole way through. I can send you the details for the show notes. The blog was called "There's No I in Uterus." So yeah, I felt like surrogacy was something that we certainly don't talk about in the Jewish community, and why. Like there's so much focus in the Jewish community on having babies and making Jewish babies. And like, this is like, we're kind of obsessed with the whole baby thing. And there are all of these people who can't have babies. And so like, there are all kinds of people that can. And so why are we not talking about this? Why are we not like working on this as a community to like match up some uteri. I never figured out what the plural was of that. We can do this. Let's make this happen. And so I really felt like I wanted to raise awareness about it. There was this whole world of surrogacy that I had no idea about. And it was fascinating to me, all of the complexities and, everything involved in that. And I really wanted to shine a light on this and just help people learn through my experience.
Wow. What an incredible story. And what an incredibly selfless thing. I'm just very blown away by that.
Yeah, I hear, and I hear that a lot. I feel like I got just as much out of it as the couple did, but I hear you. It was, it wasn't. I'm not that nice. I got a lot out of it. It's, it made me feel it was a very tangible thing. And I think especially as an executive director where so much of the work is intangible, it was so different from when I was a mikvah guide and could stand next to the person that I was supporting and know that I was giving that person a tremendous gift by my presence, by whatever I said or didn't say, that was tangible. And you don't have that as much as an executive director when you're coaching other people along, you're leading other people, you're helping them do the front lines work. And so this was a very tangible thing that I could do and point to and say, I did that. And so that was very fulfilling for me.
That makes sense. For people who feel limited by their fertility situation or are struggling to have that conversation in the Jewish community, which is very baby focused, do you have any advice on how to broach those conversations, maybe especially for other Jewish professionals like yourselves who are kind of in the public eye more so than a layperson?
Can you say more about who? I'm not sure I'm following the question. It was worded very well, and I just feel like I'm not. I'm not picking up on.
I'm curious if there were to be a hypothetical other executive director or Jewish professional who's kind of in the public eye of the community, who's having these fertility struggles, or who might be interested in surrogacy but isn't coming from the same kind of environment that you were, that allowed you such freedom into this experience. Do you have any advice for them on how to have those conversations?
Yeah. And conversations publicly or with the community?
I guess either.
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone's just really different. Some people find it very cathartic and helpful to connect and share. And, certainly for me, writing has been just in my own challenges and successes. And so writing is a way that I make sense of it for myself. And I think other people find that, and that's sometimes a great outlet, whether something is published or not. And at the same time, other people are just, much more they don't necessarily want that. And that's fine. I think it just, each person is really different. I think I always like to encourage people just to trust themselves with what they believe to be true, and to try to separate out, other people's, the perceived judgment that other people hold. I know it's way easier said than done. But I think we as a culture spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think, and then we hold ourselves back in those ways accordingly. And I think if we can all trust each other, trust ourselves a little bit more, we can be a lot more successful in doing the things that we want to do.
Mm-hmm. Did your experience as a surrogate kind of make you a lightning rod for other people to come to you with their stories? I'm curious.
Yeah, I was sort of hoping to receive a lot more people that are like, I want to do this too. I want to be a surrogate. And I certainly received some of those. I had a lot more people coming to me to say, will you carry my baby? Or, do you know anybody else like you? I'm looking for a surrogate. The need for surrogates is just high, and especially in the Jewish community. There are a lot of people who are looking specifically for surrogates. I think they're called the golden, I don't know, there's some they're the organization that helped in matching me with the intended parents. They had a waiting list of, I think 35 people on it. Some of them had been on the waiting list for 5 years or something. And I think I was maybe the first at that point Jewish surrogate that had ever come through their doors in all of their years of being open. Maybe the second. It was just, I couldn't believe it. So, so people started coming to me saying, do you have any friends? Would they do this? And I was, it was an extraordinary experience. And I would be lying if I said it did not come with stress. And it's a lot of work to be pregnant, just to be pregnant. And it's a lot of work to do that for someone else. There's a ton of communication, and it's a lot of time and effort and all of that. So, I was super glad I did it. Was not going to, was not the right thing. Wasn't a, career. I wasn't going to be a serial surrogate. And there are plenty of people who do it multiple times. That wasn't right for me, but that was, I had more people coming to me looking for surrogates. So I think it really shows the need and the people who are out there just desperate to have a baby and looking, looking for people who will do that.
I think you said when we jumped into this topic that your surrogacy came after your 3 children in your family, which means that you already had some experience with working as a parent, leading an organization as a parent. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you juggle your family as well.
Juggling sounds a lot cleaner than it is. You throw a ball up, you catch a ball. It's a lot. And especially now, when everyone's home. And so I think parenting is the hardest job in the world. I feel like there is nothing harder than raising a child, and I've got 3 of them. And so I think that there's a lot of it's a very humbling experience to be a parent. And I think over the last year or so have really discovered some of the ways that, everyone says like, oh, I learned so much from my kids. But, I think everything that triggers parents, we have to ask ourselves, well, why does that trigger me? What is that? And that's where I think kids can become incredible teachers without even knowing it, that they're, sort of seeing those frustrations and challenges and triggers as things to learn about myself that I might not have even realized before. And certainly doing that in the context of any job, any full-time job and any executive leadership role is, I think you have to become comfortable real fast with doing the best you can and knowing that it's just sort of learning to feel as comfortable enough with, holding as much as possible at any given time, but not seeing it as like, one thing at the expense of another and trying to hold, feel like, there's like perfection to be found somewhere. Like it's going to be messy. It's going to be hard. And especially now in pandemic times, I just keep coming back to that. Like, if this feels impossible, it's because it's impossible. It just is. And so, I think especially right now for parents, I just saw somebody post something on Facebook yesterday that said something like, we're not working from home. We're at home trying to work, or something like that. Like, with our kids, with, trying to keep them engaged in some kind of semblance of school and locked up in our homes. And so it's a lesson in flexibility and embracing the chaos, I think.
Embrace the chaos. That is a really excellent mantra for the past few months.
Yeah. And I think actually the one other thing that I'll say is that on that line, in some ways, when I had my 3rd kid, in some sick way, like a part of that decision making was like kind of because I just felt like I needed a break from work. Like, it's like, oh, there's a maternity leave to be had. That sounds like a great idea. I need a break. I'm going to have a kid. But in some ways it was also, I think I was doing that as a way of trying to make it even more explicit to myself that I could not be, working as much as I was and trying to like fit the kids in around that, that I really needed to pull back and create better boundaries for myself. And it was that time when I came back from maternity leave with my 3rd child, that was in 2013. And that was when I started turning off my work email from my phone at night. Like, I would leave the building at the end of the day and I would click it off so I wouldn't even see my email until I got there the next morning. And I just felt like actually I was able to be so much more productive the next day because I wasn't feeling so beaten down by everything overnight, and like looking at emails that would just stress me out, and I wasn't going to do anything with them anyway until the next day. And so I think it's the balance piece is not balance like it's ever going to be even, but just like remembering to prioritize what actually matters. And I certainly pour myself into my work and into my leadership, and kids mental health, kids physical health, the family that we're creating, like that's it's hard to remember sometimes, but that is actually that has to come first. And I think in senior leadership it can be hard to hold on to that and remember that, because there's so much responsibility on my shoulders, on other people's shoulders. So it's something I really have to hold on to.
I really appreciate what you're saying about boundaries, and I think that is undoubtedly an incredible example for your team at Mayyim Hayyim, and an amazing example for your family and for your children as well. So, Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so just grateful to have had you with us, to learn from your experiences and your wisdom and your expertise, and just thank you.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate your having this conversation with me.
So I have one last question that I ask everybody,
Sure.
as long as this quarantine is going to last, which is, what are you most looking forward to doing when we are allowed to start returning to normal?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. Letting my kids out of the house. I mean, not like I'm begging them to get out of the house every day. Like, it's gorgeous out today, and I can't get these kids off the screens and out, like, go ride your bike, and I they want to see their friends and all these things that they can't do. So at this, ask me like in 10 minutes and I'll probably have a different answer, but that's what I'm going with right now, is like, just, like, allowing my kids to like get out in the world again, and like remember that there's more to life than Minecraft. Those are my parting words. There's more to life than Minecraft.
Amazing. Well, Carrie, thank you again, and have a wonderful weekend, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to you.
LeaderFolk is all about elevating voices and starting conversations. So now we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@tcjewfolk.com to share your thoughts, your ideas, or to nominate future guests. LeaderFolk is a project of JewFolk Inc. and the JewFolk Podcast Network. For more information, visit tcjewfolk.com/podcast.